There we are. All done. It is important to note that family and caring relationships remain important for many young people through adolescence. Even in early adolescence, when peers are particularly salient, young people asked to describe their favourite people's sight family members and caring relationships as most important, more so than they do friends. Tatlow Golden and GarDjinn 2017. Family members continue to be people whose approval continues to matter and whose support affects adolescent mental health. Remember, as you learned in Chapter 5, that good adults, other than parents or outside the family, can and do take on this role for adolescents. As psychologist Susan Harter notes, the challenge at this stage of life is to remain connected to family, while at the same time forging an independent identity. 2012, page 107. After the intense peer influence of early adolescence, from mid-adolescence onwards, 14 to 18 years, research shows that in general, young people gradually decrease risk-taking and become more able to form and hold their own values. And this applies across genders and ethnic groups. Steinberg and Monahan, 2007. In part, this comes about as their self-concept develops. Shifting selves, identities, and self-esteem. In Chapter 2 and 4, you learned about the continuously evolving tasks throughout childhood and youth. The development of the self-concept, the answer to the crucial question, who am I? Including self-esteem, self-evaluation of how good am I? The self-concept is compiled from diverse characteristics and preferences and the many identities that define us. And it is shaped in self-concept and self-esteem. For example, in seeking peer approval and potentially experiencing rejection, young people become more vulnerable to self-esteem losses, particularly so in the early adolescent years. In early adolescence, the newly developed cognitive ability for more abstract thinking contributes to self-concept development, as young people can combine specific self-descriptions, such as I like to learn and I get good results, to form more general ideas. For example, I am intelligent. Harter, 2012. Building self-descriptive abstractions from different parts of life and then integrating them into an overall self-concept takes time and evolves rather unevenly, which can create some turbulence in the sense of who am I? At first, young adolescents can have contradictory ideas about themselves, such as I hate the world or I'm a happy person, but they have often not developed self-awareness about these contradictions or how to resolve them. Harter, 2012. Part of the adolescent transition involves developing multiple identities as part of the overall self-concept, because it is socially essential to be able to interact opportunely with, for example, friends, relatives, or teachers. In mid-adolescence, as abstract thinking skills increase, young people's self-awareness of different and unintegrated identities grow, sometimes leading to conflict, confusion, and distress. Harter, 2012, page 108. Particularly if significant others give contradictory messages about which aspects of the self-concept to value. Older adolescents, 17 to 18-year-olds, develop more self-awareness about how different contexts can elicit varied self-qualities, identities, and behaviors, thereby understanding better how different selves and values can be integrated into an overall coherent self-narrative. For example, a younger adolescent might struggle with experiencing themselves as depressed, cheerful, and caring, yet later come to understand that these do not necessarily conflict, but could be appropriate responses to situations they encountered, or could reflect a self that is sensitive. Older adolescents' self-esteem tends to improve, probably because they become better able to identify domains that matter to them, making them less vulnerable to self-evaluations in domains they are less successful in and are less dependent on others' evaluations. Art of 2012. In Chapter 4, you learned about how carers scaffold the developing self-concept by telling young children stories about themselves. This continues through childhood, and in adolescence, the autobiographical self becomes a richer as a collection of stories and memories about the self deepens with adolescent memories and abilities to reason. It develops in mind to later adolescence, and indeed continues to change through life, depending on what is emotionally and potentially salient. Nelson and Fivish, 2020. Importantly, building an autobiographical self, one that feels coherent, even though it is made up of many different identities and self-descriptions, is further supported throughout adolescence by significant others who can contextualize experience, offering vocabulary to describe these aspects of the self and opportunities for discussion and reflection. Body image and the sense of self. Another aspect of the self that gains particular importance in adolescence is how we look. Although appearance is often dismissed as something inherently superficial, in fact, perceptions of appearance are often a powerful predictor of self-esteem. Hart, 2012. Notably, the media and peers generally influence self-evaluations of appearance more strongly than parents. This takes place even in childhood years, but even more so in adolescence, when young people's bodies are changing rapidly and peer evaluations are so focal. Hart, 2012. Accessing factors that can contribute to self-esteem in over 600 young adolescents aged 10 to 13 years across the Greater Dublin region in Ireland. Researchers found that ratings of physical appearance were inseparable from overall self-esteem. Guerin and Tatlow-Golden, 2019. As you learned in Chapter 4, standard psychological measures accesses young people's perceptions of their popularity with peers, friendship, academic and supporting ability, and enjoyment, teachers and parents' views of their behaviour and other factors, yet self-rated appearance trumped them all. Building self and identity in a digital era. An important issue for contemporary youth is how adolescents develop identities and an overall self-concept in their new hybrid reality, see Chapter 11, where offline and online worlds connect dynamically and interactively in a single holistic context. Granick, Morita and Scoulton, 2020, page 196. And whether they can be better supported than they are at present. This presents substantial challenges to those designing online worlds and to policymakers seeking to guide and regulate these. For example, Granick et al. Review of research concluded that many adolescents say they have less control over their autobiographical identities in social media because content travels in ways they cannot control. That many adolescents' developing ability for self-reflection is not supported by social media, which is designed and optimized to reward quick responses, and that preoccupation with appearance on social media is associated with poorer mental health. At the same time, however, Granick and colleagues found that some young people experience greater well-being in social media because they can express themselves honestly with peers, offering opportunities to explore their developing selves and identities in their hybrid realities. This is a field of policy, tech design, and research that is struggling to keep up with adolescents' lived experiences and to offer suitable opportunities for their developing selves. Key points. Adolescence is a time of intense focus on peers and peer approval, yet family and other carers remain important. In early adolescence, risk-taking increases, particularly around peers. Through adolescence, the sense of self becomes more complex and insightful, building an abstract thinking, reasoning, and autobiographical storytelling skills. Self-perceptions of physical appearance are a powerful component of adolescent self-esteem. A contemporary adolescence takes place in offline/online hybrid reality. This offers potential but also challenges with developmental and well-being that researchers are only beginning to understand. Transforming themselves, transforming society. Adolescence, this chapter has argued, is a time for a change and transformation, and this has taken place at a social and political level too. Teenagers changed society after the Second World War. They were at the forefront of civil rights movements, for example, in the USA in the 1960s, where they demanded social justice and equality and played a prominent role in protests and marches. In South Africa, young people were active in the anti-apartheid movement, especially after the Soweto uprising in 1976, in which, among others, 13-year-old Hector Pearson and 15-year-old Hastings Ndlovu were shot dead by police while taking part in a peaceful demonstration against compulsory schooling in Afrikaans, widely perceived as the language of their white oppressors in school. Teenagers and young people were at the vanguard of Arab Springs protests in the early 2010s amidst economic stagnation, corruption, and a lack of opportunities and problems. Predominantly young protesters took to the streets in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, leading to uprisings, social violence, and the deposing of leaders. The Jasmine or Facebook revolution of 2010-11 in Tunisia was spearheaded by the young, and several teenagers were killed in the protest who rejected the regime's appeals to national and cultural identity and instead articulated a generational identity and clear goals for themselves and society features using modern technologies. They created their own spaces for dissent and protest and new ways of engaging with the state. Honawana, 2013. In Iran, 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was arrested in September 2022 by an Iranian. It is widely believed beaten by the police. Civil unrest swept across Iran, initiated by young people and including school children. Winter 2022. Climate change has also brought extreme influential teenage activists to the forefront. In India, for example, in 2018, 16-year-old Aditya Mukherjee led to a drive against single-use plastics in Delhi, persuading 150 different businesses in the city to go plastic-free and come into international prominence. Only Goa 2019. Across the world, the year 2019 was characterized by mass protests in major cities calling on governments to tackle the climate crisis, including Fridays for Fortune strikes, when children and teenagers left school and joined weekly protests against government's inaction. Most famously, teenage activist Greta Thunberg, then aged 16, addressed the 2019 Climate Summit at the United Nations and demanded that climate change be seen as an intergenerational term, denouncing those who had let her generation down. You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. How dare you? You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you, and if you choose to fail us, I say, we will never forgive you. Thornburg, 2019. Figure 13.5. Civil rights protesters in Charlotte, North Carolina in February 1960, African American young people started a series of peaceful protests at stores where had whites-only lunch counters, refusing to leave after they had declined service. They staged sit-ins. Other young African Americans followed suit, staging sit-ins across the southern states of the USA when they refused to accept their status as second-class citizens. Teenage activism, often a force for good in the world, is not always significantly acknowledged and celebrated. After the end of the apartheid era in South Africa, for example, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission examined its injustices, and despite its importance, it has been criticized for reducing teenagers to the role of child victims, looking at crimes against them rather than recognizing their organization, political commitment, and bravery. It is important, therefore, neither to romanticize young people's political activism nor to underplay the difficulties that teenagers have in contributing positively. Honwana and Boak, 2005, while at the same time recognizing the potential they have for political insight and engagement. Key points. Teenage creativity and rebellion can be highly positive, and young people have played important roles in many social justice movements throughout the world. The impact and potential of teenage activism is not always recognized, and their rights to contribute to public life are often not facilitated. Conclusion. In combining psychological, cultural, historical, and biological research, this chapter has examined how adolescence involves considerable social, cognitive, and neurobiological transformations within the forces of nature and nurture, which brings a flux of gains and losses, using their growing abstract thinking, reasoning, and autobiographical storytelling abilities. Adolescents test their sense of self and their place in the wider and increasingly hybrid world. They place increasing focus on peers, particularly seeking peer approval, while still recognizing the importance of family and other carers. The new social environments, neurobiological developments, and characterize this transition towards adulthood prompt greater pro-social and risk-taking behavior. Finally, reframing adolescence as a time of opportunities for enhanced learning and participation can challenge stereotypical negative perceptions of adolescents as moody, unpredictable risk takers, teenage creativity, energy exploration thinking, and rebellion can be highly positive, and young people have played important roles in many social justice movements throughout the world. I think what's happening is governments know that teenagers or adolescents are highly combative whilst they're building their own self. So they encourage things that are illegal in said countries. Remember all them other countries? Now, wouldn't it be better that them people that it's illegal for go to a country where it is legal for what they feel is their views, rather than breaking the law and getting shot dead for it and creating political instability in other countries that is nothing to do with the Northern Hemisphere? And that's my personal opinion.